And now it's time for some things in the news that caught my eye, and I was very excited to see this new device coming out from Analogue, which is one of the best, if not the best, maker of retro clone consoles. And this one is going to simulate the Sega Genesis and the Mega Drive through the use of a field programmable gate array chip. And we've covered a bunch of these Analogue consoles in the past. And in fact, I'll put a bunch of the videos I've done on these in the master playlist down below. The one I have in my hand here is their NES clone console. This one is called the NT Mini. It was wicked expensive when it came out and still is, about $450. They only release them every once in a while. But it runs the NES library along with just about every other console from the 80s. And because it's using one of these FPGA chips, they're doing a hardware simulation versus straight up software emulation, and it works a lot better than many of the emulators you may have played with. Very low latency on this. They have an absolute genius designing the hardware, this guy named Kevtris. We're going to try to get him on for an interview at some point because he has been replicating these old systems in FPGA better than anybody, and he's been making consoles now for Analogue to get some of these old consoles working better with your HD television. It's going to sell for $189, so as far as clone consoles go, that's kind of expensive. But what's funny is this is the same price that I paid for my Sega Genesis that you see behind me right here back in 1989. So of course it was more from an inflationary standpoint back then, but it's the same exact launch price. The controller does not come with it though. You have to get that separately. And 8BitDo is coming up with their own retro-inspired Genesis 6-button controller that will work wirelessly with it. They're going to sell for about $25. I've already pre-ordered both the console and the controller. So we'll be getting all that in, and around April or so, we'll have a full review of this thing when it comes out. Now, like the original Sega Genesis, this new console will have the expansion port on the side. So if you have an original Sega CD unit, you can slide this new console into your old Sega CD, and they say it will work just like the original did, but now at 1080p with the FPGA running the Sega Genesis side of that device. You'll recall the Sega CD had its own processor and some extra video chips inside of it. It'll all just work in concert because they've replicated the original hardware in that FPGA chip on this new console. So that's really cool. It will not, though, support the 32X, at least not initially, and I think it might be a little too complex for what they have available inside of that FPGA chip. But who knows, if they get around to it or there's enough user interest, we might see 32X support in the future. But there's a lot of compatibility here. Sega CD, the Master System, they're going to have a Game Gear adapter apparently, and a few of the older 8-bit Sega devices will also work on this too. So this is going to be a really fun console when it comes out. And yes, this is a very high price to pay for a 16-bit clone console, but if you want the best, this is the best, like all of the other clone consoles they've been putting out over the last couple of years. And what's been good about what Analogue is doing here is they're not trying to exploit the market. They're producing really good, high-quality hardware for a very niche audience, and the niche that they are serving is quite happy with what they are putting together. And I wanted to put up this comment from Richard Keller because I think this is really where most consumers are. Which is the fact that you can get on the Xbox One X, for example, 150 Atari games for very little money. That new Sega pack came out with over 50 great games on it, hours upon hours of gameplay there for like $30. Rare's got a collection, Capcom, Namco, everybody's coming up with emulated versions of their old games on modern consoles that everybody already has. In many cases, you can buy these games digitally. You don't have to go out and get any additional hardware or spend $450 on a FPGA device. And I think for most consumers, they're going to be perfectly happy with what Richard is doing here, and they're not going to want to get one of these things. And that is why Analogue, I think, has been approaching this market very smartly. They don't produce more consoles than the market will bear. They're not looking to become some big video game conglomerate. They're serving a particular portion of the market that is looking for something very specific, and they are managing to make a good business out of it because they don't have their eyes set on becoming the next Sega or Nintendo in the course of this. And if you look around at what consumers are buying from a hardware standpoint, this is the kind of stuff they're getting. You know, those who are looking for some nostalgia with the old tactile feel of the original consoles are picking up those mini Nintendo devices. We may see the N64 one this year. The Atari flashbacks are found at every Walgreens and pharmacy that you can imagine around here. They've got great distribution from AT Games, even though their hardware is terrible. But people are buying this stuff because, you know what, they're cheap and available, and it's good enough, I think, for most consumers. And quite honestly, when you plug in an Atari flashback to your HD television, it's going to look better than you remembered your Atari looking on your old Zenith TV, for example. So there's really, I think, not a huge consumer demand for this stuff, and I think Analogue has approached this market very realistically. And then on the flip side, of course, are some of these crowd-funded adventures like the infamous Coleco Chameleon or the Poly Mega that we looked at a few weeks ago. Very expensive. They're trying to appeal to regular consumers, but regular consumers aren't buying this stuff. They want to get the compilation that can get downloaded to their PlayStation in a second or two, with the games costing a couple cents a piece, not having to go out and try to find some rare cartridges for a couple $100 to play some old 16-bit game they played as a kid. I just don't see it happening with either of these devices. There's another one now that is reviving the Intellivision brand. It's called the Amico. They're going to offer, I'm guessing, Intellivision games, but they also plan to offer other digital titles for download. But $180, and it's kind of a lot, and it's really not going to offer any different of an experience than what you could get buying those same games through a regular game console. The one thing they're trying to push this one as is a family-friendly device. Apparently, it's not going to have any games with violence in them, so maybe they might get a spot at Walmart with this. Maybe some parents might find that appealing, that their kids won't stumble across something more violent. But again, I just don't see it happening. But we'll keep an eye on it. This one might prove me wrong, but again, every other attempt has not been working out too well. So we'll keep our eye on that. And in the meantime, I think Analogue approaches this market a lot more realistically.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Chris Allegretta, the Four Guys with Quarters podcast, Tom Albrecht, Too Much Sauce, Gerard Newberg, and Kalyan Kumar. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe.